Hey guys, welcome back. This is Pastor Jay. Welcome to Intelligent Faith 315. This is part 4 of our lesson, Has Science Eliminated the Need for God? Such an important question to ask. This is part 4 of this lesson. I encourage you to watch the previous 3 episodes. Quickly, do encourage you to go to iTunes and check out our podcast, Reason to Believe, in the singular, Reason to Believe. It's a good apologetic podcast with notes and downloadable material. There's about 30 episodes or so. Also, go to check out our mother website, intelligentfaith315.com. If you're interested in becoming trained and equipped in how to defend the Christian faith, there's lots of evidence and great resources to demonstrate the truth claims of the Christian Worldview, intelligentfaith315.com. Or you can just go to YouTube and check out our YouTube channel at intelligentfaith315. As I said, today is part 4 of our lesson, Has Science Eliminated the Need for God? Let me just quickly resume the 5 points in this lesson that we're going to be covering. The 5 points that we started out last time, or the 5 reasons, I should say, that we mentioned why science has not eliminated the need for God. 5 reasons why science has not eliminated the classical Christian concept of God. The classical Christian theistic concept of God would be the following, as you can see behind me. Number 1, the scientific founding fathers. We're still within that portion of the lesson, and we're discussing the fact that for the vast majority of the cases, the founding fathers of the modern scientific enterprise were largely Christian theists. Some of them were deists, but most of them were Christian theists. And so that's a very interesting piece of information to add into the equation of, is science opposed to religion? Is science the friend or the foe of Christianity, let's say? So the scientific founding fathers, that's claim number 1. Claim number 2 is the claim of scientism. We'll get into this today. We'll discuss what the claim of scientism is, and that it's actually a self-defeating, self-contradictory idea. Number 3, simple irrelevance, that 95% of information that is discussed within the field of science really has nothing to do, and there's no overlay or intersection with the claims of the Christian faith. So we'll talk about simple irrelevance. We'll also talk about strong support, that the areas of science that do intersect and overlay with the Christian faith, there is strong support for the ideas of Christian theism. And then finally, we'll talk about a single perspective. We'll talk about the fact that science is a great and reliable and very interesting avenue to pursue and obtain truth about reality, but it really is, at the end of the day, a single perspective. And there are many, many other avenues, very reliable ways we can obtain truth about reality. And some of them are even more solid or trustworthy than science. So those are the 5 reasons why we are claiming, and we're going to assume the burden of proof for this, that science has not eliminated the need for God. The scientific founding fathers, scientism as a self-defeating idea, simple irrelevance, strong support, and a single perspective. Those are the 5 points we'll be delineating within this lesson. And as I said, we're on part 4 today. We began to talk about the scientific founding fathers last time. As I said, that in many areas of modern science, they were founded and pioneered by Christians and believers in God. So most of these guys were Christian theists. If they weren't Christian theists, they were deists in the vast majority of cases. And this is an interesting component to add into the debate of science versus God, or science with God, etc. So the Christian founding fathers. We talked about Plato and Aristotle, undoubtedly 2 of the greatest thinkers of Western civilization. And these men were not just philosophers in the abstract sense. They are also natural philosophers or scientists. We talked about the fact that Aristotle and Plato, from their quotes, they definitely believed in God. Plato usually called his God the form of the good, capital G, and Aristotle called his God the demiurgos, or the demiurge. As you can see here, Plato said that God is not the author of all things, but of good only. And Aristotle said that beauty is the gift from God. So Plato and Aristotle, 2 of the most fascinating and widely contributing thinkers of Western civilization, they both believed in science, but also in a creator God at the same time. So very, very interesting. We talked about Leonardo da Vinci, a prolific artist, inventor, and scientist, mentioned in his journals his personal belief in God. And I do encourage you to look at the previous lessons, or the previous episodes on this lesson to go over his quotes. Nicholas Copernicus from the 1500s. This was a man who was largely responsible for discovering heliocentricity, as you can see here, that the sun is in the center of our solar system. This man was an outright spoken Christian, but also one of the greatest scientists ever to have lived. Galileo Galilei, an Italian scientist and Christian. Galileo is responsible for vast improvements in the telescope, pioneering observational astronomy, and is called by many the father of science and astronomy. And Galileo, as you can see from his quotes, is a devout Christian. Now, he was opposed by certain elements in his church of the day, but this is because they bought into the reigning scientific theory of geocentricity. Good warning there for believers to buy into everything that science is saying at the time, because though science is a great avenue to pursue truth, science is contingent upon inductive reasoning, which at its very best only can give you probabilities, and probabilistic reasoning is very often false, and it happened to be the case in his day. The church had bought into the reigning scientific and philosophical idea of the day of geocentricity, but Galileo, as a devout Christian man, but a wonderful scientist, he, along with Nicholas Copernicus, discovered heliocentricity as opposed to geocentricity. So he also is a great man, and as you can see in his quotes from our previous lessons, from our previous episodes on this lesson, that he was very much a man who believed in the complementary nature of science and belief in God. Not contradictory nature, complementary nature. That's Galileo. We talked about Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scientists and thinkers who has ever lived. Isaac Newton, as you will know, he was responsible for a theory of light, universal gravitation, discovering the 3 laws of motion. He was a devout, outspoken Christian. He even wrote a commentary on the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. So one of the greatest thinkers of all times, of course responsible for Newtonian physics, Isaac Newton was a devout believer in God, and he found his scientific research to be an open window through which he could see the mechanics of the universe and how God had designed them. So Isaac Newton as well. Louis Pasteur from the 1800s, a man who was responsible for germ theory, and also a man who in his day disproved spontaneous generation. He has been called the founder of modern medicine by some, and of course the father of bacteriology, because he discovered germs and bacteria through his famous experiments. And also, as you can see in his quotes in our previous episodes, a fantastic believer in Jesus Christ, a follower of the Christian Worldview, but also a fantastic scientist as well. Francis Bacon, this man is a philosopher, a statesman, a jurist, an author, and a scientist. His most notable contribution was kind of the invention of what is called the scientific method. There doesn't happen to be really one singular scientific method, but there is a scientific method that is commonly referred to, and Francis Bacon, a devout Christian believer in God, was the originator and contributor of what is today called the scientific method. So Francis Bacon, again, very interesting figure, and he saw science as complementary to his belief in a creator God. Johannes Kepler, in addition to being a Christian, he was a German mathematician and astronomer, a key figure in the 17th century scientific revolution, but also a wonderful believer in God. Through his quotes, which we've covered in previous episodes, it's very obvious to see that Johannes Kepler was a dedicated and devout Christian man, and I believe that he also was the man who actually coined the phrase that through a study of God's works, we shall know him. Through a study of the natural order, you can see through it and beyond it to the supernatural agent behind it, namely God. So Johannes Kepler, a great man to add to our lineup of scientific founding fathers. Robert Boyle, 17th century natural philosopher, chemist, physicist, inventor, and also noted for his writings in Christian theology here. He also originated Boyle's gas laws, a very strong Christian believer in the Christian creator and God, and as you can see, in the realm of science, one of the founding fathers in many disciplines. He also is added to that lineup. James Clerk Maxwell is responsible with Michael Faraday for developing the discovery of electromagnetism and electromagnetic theory. He was a physicist and mathematician in the 1800s, a very strong and devout Christian man, but also a very capable scientist. James Clerk Maxwell, also a man who discovered, or who thought rather, that his scientific investigation was an expression of his faith in the designer of the cosmos. And then I believe we ended last time with Michael Faraday, who, as you will remember, is a chemist, a physicist, and a philosopher who greatly contributed to the fields of electromagnetism and electrochemistry. Although he received little formal education, he was one of the most influential scientists in history, and Albert Einstein even had a picture of Michael Faraday upon his mantelpiece alongside of Isaac Newton. So, interesting that Albert Einstein, one of the greatest scientists, we say, that ever lived, had a picture on his mantelpiece of two Christian scientific thinkers, Isaac Newton on the one hand, Michael Faraday on the other. And as we said last time, that the biographers of Michael Faraday, who, as you can see here, is largely responsible for the invention of the chemical battery, which then led to the invention of mechanical motors and so forth because of the magnetic powers and moving weights and so forth. The biographers of Michael Faraday have always noted that a strong unity of nature and God's workings have been disclosed in his writings. So as you can see here, biographers have noted a strong sense of the unity of God and nature pervaded Faraday's life and work. So again, Michael Faraday, one of the great contributors to the modern scientific revolution or age, he was a very, very strong believer in God. Even the documentary, The Elegant Universe, I believe, with Michael Green. No, I'm sorry. It wasn't The Elegant Universe. It was E = MC squared, a really interesting documentary that just came out about the world's most famous equation, E = MC squared. One of the scientists that's highlighted within that story is Michael Faraday, and they even highlight his Christian faith in that film, in that documentary as well, E = MC squared. So Michael Faraday, another great man to add to the lineup. Baron Kelvin, as you can see behind me, Kelvin was a mathematical physicist and engineer. As a Christian, he did important work in the mathematical analysis of electricity, formulation of the first and second laws of thermodynamics. He helped develop physics in its modern form, and he is known for realizing that there was a lower limit to temperature, absolute zero. And so, of course, today as we measure many times temperature in Kelvin, Lord Kelvin, Baron Kelvin here, from the 1800s, is largely responsible for that. And in his quote, he says, "The more thoroughly I conduct scientific research, the more I believe that science excludes atheism." The more I believe that science excludes atheism. The atheistic idea is so nonsensical that I cannot put it into words. Creative power is the only feasible answer to the origin of life. From a scientific perspective, interesting, creative power is the only answer to the origin of life, not the evolution of life, that's a separate issue, but to how non-living chemicals were galvanized into action and became living. Lord Kelvin here, he says that creative power, the power of a creator, is the only feasible scientific answer to the origin of life problem, and it is still a problem, by the way, if you don't know that, for the neo-Darwinist, I should say, or the atheist. The more I conduct scientific research, the more I believe that science excludes atheism. Do not be afraid of being free thinkers. If you think strongly enough, you will be forced by science to the belief in God. Let me read that portion again. I love that. Do not be afraid of being free thinkers. He attached the phrase of being a free thinker to being a man who was unafraid to pursue after the scientific evidence, and that being a free thinker, a creative thinker, and following the evidence wherever it leads you would lead you to the belief in a creator God, which he saw to be the most feasible scientific explanation. He says that if you think strongly enough, you will be forced by the science to believe in God. If you follow the evidence wherever it leads, it will lead you to a belief in God, which is the foundation of all religion. He says you will find science not antagonistic, but helpful to religion. So Lord Kelvin, especially with those great quotes, is a fascinating man, not only as a modern, so to say, founding father of science because of his contributions in mathematical physics as an engineer, thermodynamics, and discovering this lower limit of temperature, absolute zero, a fantastic scientist, but an outspoken and a strong believer in the fact that science was not antagonistic to faith in a creator, but rather complementary. And as I said, He believes that science excludes atheism. He believes that the atheistic idea is absolutely nonsensical and non-scientific, and that the greatest scientific answer for the origin of life would be a creator God. And so Lord Kelvin here, a great man, encouraging me to be a free thinker and saying that if you think strongly enough, then you will be forced by the evidence to your belief in a creator God. And so, a great man to add to the list. And we will finish with today with Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein is held up by so many people as one of the greatest scientific minds ever. And he is a great scientific mind, absolutely. He lived from 1879 to 1955. As you can see, he is the author of the world's most famous equation, E equals mc squared. Let me just ask you real quick, do you know what E equals mc squared actually stands for? Many people, of course, can quote this equation, but many people don't understand what it actually means. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. The C is the Latin word celeritas, which is for speed, the speed of light. And so any particle of mass multiplied by the square of the speed of light is equal to a tremendous amount of energy that is kept up inside of that particle. And of course, with splitting the atom, we understand how much energy is released when you break those subatomic bonds. So Albert Einstein, author of the world's most famous equation, he was a German-born theoretical physicist who developed the theory of general relativity, effecting a revolution in physics. For this achievement, Einstein is often regarded as the father of modern physics. And so you have in Albert Einstein a transition because we had Newtonian physics of the old world, let's say, and then in the modern world, they typically would tell us that Albert Einstein is the father of modern physics. It is right to hold him up as a great mind of scientific investigation and discovery. But did you know, ladies and gentlemen, especially if you're watching this and you are a naturalist, a materialist, a neo-Darwinist, or perhaps an atheist, did you know that Albert Einstein was a believer in a creator God? Not the Christian God. He was not a Christian theist, but he was a deist. Very much so like the late Dr. Anthony Flew, who in the 1950s was the most outspoken and antagonistic atheist. A very famous philosopher Anthony Flew was. And I believe it was in the year 2006, Anthony Flew, much like Albert Einstein, became convinced because of the scientific evidence that there must be a creator and designer. And he also became a deist. So Anthony Flew, one of the most notorious atheists of the middle of the 20th century, along with Albert Einstein, both in a sense converted to a belief in God's existence, and they became deists. Not Christians, not Christian theists, but deists. Let's read some of the quotes of Albert Einstein, this father of modern physics and a man who believed in God. He told us, I'll read it from over here, "Science without religion is lame, but religion without science is blind." A very interesting quote. I would agree with him that religion without science is blind, but science without religion is lame. He says this here unequivocally, so that science needs supernatural explanations, explanations that in a sense go beyond science in order to be effective. He says, "My religion consists of a humble admiration of the illimitable superior spirit who reveals himself in the slight details we are able to perceive with our frail and feeble minds." So he says there is a spirit, a mind, behind the physical order that reveals himself upon investigation. Albert Einstein would also say, everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that a spirit is manifested in the laws of the universe. They're all laws of the universe, and Albert Einstein, using very simple deductive reasoning, says if there's laws, there must be a lawgiver. And he says behind the laws of the universe, the lawgiver, the mind, makes himself evident and manifest, a spirit vastly superior to that of man, and one in the face of which we, with our modest powers, must feel humble. Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and Richard Dawkins would do well to take some advice from their scientific predecessor that they need to humble themselves in light of our feeble mental powers in recognition of this divine mind that makes himself so obvious in the world around us. The scientist's religious feelings, he says, take the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. Fantastic quote from Albert Einstein. Religious feelings of the scientist take the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals a divine intelligence, is what Albert Einstein would tell us. And so again, if you are a fan of Albert Einstein, if you are a fan of the father of modern physics, you must come to terms with what he thought was fantastic evidence for the existence of a supernatural divine mind. Natural law, harmony, mathematical and physical elegance that evidenced a designer and intellect behind the created world. And finally, a great quote from Albert Einstein, and we will end this episode with this. He says, "I want to know how God created this world. I am not interested in this or that phenomenon, in this spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details." Fantastic quote from Albert Einstein. I want to know how God created his world. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are only details. And if truth really exists, and of course it does, we've covered this in previous episodes, if truth exists, then all truth is God's truth, and any legitimate truth you come across, be it of a scientific nature or of another, are God's thoughts. Truth is learning the mind of God. And Albert Einstein, he says, I want to know God's thoughts. And so he perceived his investigation of science, of physics, of mathematics to be chasing after and understanding the mind of God. And he says, I want to know how God created this world. So we'll end it there. And I just want to invite you, friend. Many of you that are watching these are atheists. And I'm so glad that you're here. People like my friend Bunto Skiffler that are watching, I'm so glad you guys are tuning in. But I want you just to take a moment for personal reflection. Listen. How is it possible that the greatest men of the scientific revolution, modern scientific founding fathers, how is it possible that they, being professional, educated scientists, men who have historically revolutionized scientific investigation and discovery, how is it possible that they understood science to be complementary to belief in God, but you, the viewer, do not? How is it possible that these men, from a variety of disciplines of bacteriology, biology, physics, astronomy, how is it that they understood science to be a signature, a hallmark, something that leads to belief in God, and that atheism on a scientific basis alone is a nonsensical idea, but you, the believer, do not? Do you really know as much as you think you know about science? Do you really think that you perhaps have a greater scientific understanding than these modern scientific founding fathers? I'd like for you to consider that. I'd like for you, the viewer, to consider the fact that perhaps you have not followed the evidence wherever it's led. Perhaps you, the viewer, have not gathered enough scientific evidence to make a feasible or well-balanced decision as to this issue of does God exist or not. I would encourage you to incorporate into your own thinking, into your own judgment on this issue, the opinion of these modern scientific founding fathers as to the question of whether science has eliminated God or not. They would say no. These men would say science has confirmed the existence of God. That's it for today. We're going to continue on in our next episode of this lesson with going to point number 2, the idea of scientism and how it is a self-defeating, self-contradictory idea. Encourage you to come back next time. Until then, have an intelligent faith.